operations over which we have manufacturing control, namely our joint ventures, we insist on appointing the quality management function in that enterprise. We don't use outside sources. We do have our own staff of supplier quality engineers who are responsible for quality assurance function at our suppliers.
We also use our own QA, QC people at the factory. We required by law now, federal law, to have third-party testing for, let's say, if there's lead in the steel, or there's phthalates in the plastic. So it's a combination, but we've always used our own people. I think we've tried to hook up some of our newer factories, like with an SGS for processes for QA, QC. That's been successful, but for the day-to-day, we use our own people.
Yeah, Jordan, we do a combination of our own folks. There are many qualified third parties that do this as well. In fact, there are many firms that are led by former expats that were with Fortune 500 companies that have started their own operations to provide these and other services. Another thing that we do a lot are third-party supply chain audits. We have an office supply business that makes plastic office supply products, and we're the leading supplier of these to Staples, Office Max, Office Mart. And they want to know that none of the products that we're using come from child labor, prison labor, stuff like that. So we started out having folks do those audits, and then it's evolved into the quality control. One of the biggest risks in China for us is when you find a great supplier for a component, and then if they're bumping up against capacity, until they can add capacity, sometimes the quality goes down, or you might have to switch to another supplier, and you need the time to evaluate that. So we use third parties for a lot of that evaluation. Okay, another question?
I'll go again.
Or wait, hold on. You have a question? Okay, I thought I had. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, material is manufactured in accordance to a U.S. standard through ASME or something comparable. Do you find it when you're dealing with the factories that you're getting that compliance in order to sell in the U.S.? Or do you find some way of offsetting what standards reference when material does come back into the U.S.?
I know with our companies, they're very up to speed on all those standards. The engineer, when an engineer is talking to an engineer, there's sort of this, they're on the same wavelength, and we find it pretty easy. Now, they might not be able to do the standard, but they clearly understand it, and there are competent ways of checking that it's done properly. At least that's what my experience has been.
Same. All our products have to comply with the ASTM standards and now new federal regulations. So they're clear, they're specific, but they have to meet them. They can't go around them. So yeah, engineer to engineer, they get moved.
Okay. Yes.
The prices went up so much in China, they evaluated other countries to switch production to.
Yeah, the cost is about rising prices in China. Let me comment on that first. Most of our companies produced in China that we export back to the U.S. or import into the U.S. are industrial products where the raw material is 70 to 80% of our cost. This could be aluminum die-cast products, electric motors, plastic parts. And so our internal evaluation has shown that the raw material prices don't change when the renminbi appreciated 25%. If a pound of aluminum is $1.25 a pound, it's $1.25 a pound worldwide, give or take a little bit. And if the renminbi is appreciated, it just means that our operation in China takes less renminbi to buy that. So that part's sort of neutralized, which means there's only 20-30% that's impacted. And labor costs for most of our companies are 5 to 7% of total sales. So it's a relatively small amount. In fact, and that's for X works. So if you make something and it's ready for sale with a local profit margin built in, then when you add transportation costs of, I don't even know what it is now, $3,000–4,000 a container, that's not going to change. The import duties will impact it a little bit, but we have found that if the renminbi goes up 25%, the landed costs for most of our products only goes up 3 to 5% because of that high raw material price, which is kind of a global price. Now, in industries where there's a much higher labor content, you know, whether it's assembly or putting stuff together or textiles, then it is a much bigger impact. But for a lot of industrial products, it's not as big a factor as you might think.
In 2009, when the ITC was looking at the tariff on tires, we understood that it was going to have substantial impact on the cost of the product. And one of the steel workers' suppositions when they testified was that they were going to bring jobs back to the U.S. by this tariff coming on board. Other people said, well, they're not going to come back here because the U.S. manufacturers are out of that. So it's just going to shift that production to other countries where there's still a low cost of production. In the summer of 2009 and fall of 2009, I don't know how many miles I flew with Northwest, but I was going to every country we could think of that had independent manufacturing base to be able to supply tires to the U.S. And what we discovered, it didn't exist. The manufacturing base in Thailand, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, most of it was controlled by the major tire manufacturers, so that wasn't available to us. And the independent manufacturer we did find was not in a position to be able to supply the type of product we needed for vehicles here in the U.S. So what ended up happening was the Korea manufacturers, Japanese manufacturers that were controlled by the major manufacturers shipped more tires in. We continued to buy tires from China. That's where we took part of our margin hit because we had to shrink our margins on those tires to be able to compete at where those tires are positioned in the market. But we did not find substantial manufacturing base in other parts of the world that could step in and supply those products to us.
You have anything? Well, I also, when I spoke a second ago, I was talking about the renminbi changes. Labor costs have gone up significantly. Jim, I think you used a number of 300%. Over 200%. We've seen a 500% increase over 7-8 years. But again, for our particular situation, it's been such a relatively small part of our total cost that it needs managed. I got to tell you a funny story. One of our plants in southern China makes elevator motors and golf cart motors, etc. And we were having an operations review meeting, and the HR person was saying that we're really happy. We've got our turnover rate down to 7%. And I said, 7%? That's great. And I was going on, and then the general manager says, Andy, 7% a month. And it had been 15%. And that just shows you, when people will be making $200–300 a month, and they can make $10 more a month across the street, they'll leave in a second. It's very hard to get loyalty. And so what we've learned from that is any key position, whether it's a manager or somebody on the shop floor, if we train somebody and they're good and they have a good attitude, we try to make sure that their compensation is to the point where we can keep them. And so we want to be ahead of the curve on that. And I think many firms that are doing business in China, they try to stay ahead of that curve because there's nothing worse than than being, quote, cheap on hiring people and then always having to get new ones, and it ends up costing you a lot more in the long run. Well, Siva, we're sort of on schedule, so with that, I'd like to thank our panelists and thank you, and we have a couple gifts for our panelists, and thank you very much.
Andy, we also have one for you as well. And it is break time at this point, but we are going to start promptly at 10:30. So we've got about 10 minutes for a break. Restrooms outside, coffee and breakfast are still out there at this point. We'll see you at 10:30.